Right. Does that mean we're live? We're live. Okay, here we go. Good evening, everybody. Welcome to those of us who are here in person to the State Library of New South Wales, and to everyone who's joining us online, welcome as well. My name is Bri Lee. I am the very lucky host of the B-List Book Club here at the State Library. I begin, as always, by acknowledging that we are gathering on what always was and always will be Aboriginal land. On behalf of myself and Lech and everyone present, we pay our respects to elders past and present. And I want to encourage anyone who's watching at home to consider where they are. Where we are here in Sydney is Gadigal land in the Eora Nation. And when I say that on behalf of Lech and myself as well, and hopefully everyone here, what we also acknowledge is that sovereignty was never ceded, there has been no treaty, and we support the Uluru Statement from the Heart. I would also like to flag up front that Lech's incredible book deals with some devastating events and also devastating issues. If anyone here at any point in time this evening just needs a bit of a breather, please feel free to just get up and leave and then come back if you want, or don't if you're not feeling comfortable. And for everyone, of course, Lifeline is 13 11 14. Also, please, everyone who's here in person, can you check your mobile phones are either off or on silent? If you think they're on silent, please make sure you don't have any weird PM alarms that might go off. And I'm going to read out the endorsement that I was so thrilled and proud to be able to give my dear friend Lech for his incredible book, his debut memoir, Car Crash. I began this book with my guts in my mouth. Then, as I read on, I winced with recognition. I laughed and my heart gradually broke open. It's odd to talk about talent when a book covers such sensitive, sad subject matter, but the truth is that Blaine has it. There are wicked one-liners and a mastery of metaphor. This book is for everyone. It truly captures something of modern Australia in a tenderly told story of one young man's tumultuous coming of age. Lech Blaine is a writer from Toowoomba, now based in Sydney. His work appears widely, including in the Best Australian Essays, Meanjin, The Guardian, and The Monthly. An inaugural Griffith Review Queensland Writing Fellow, he won the 2017 Queensland Premier's Young Publishers and Writers Award and the 2019 Brisbane Lord Mayor's Emerging Artists Fellowship. Please make him feel very welcome.
Thank you very much.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
How are you doing? This is a huge moment and it's been a long time coming.
Yeah, I've had a little bit on my plate, so I haven't. I'm not too nervous. I'm a little bit nervous now that I'm holding a microphone and looking at an audience of people who aren't saying anything. That's a little bit nerve-wracking, but yeah, I'm not completely shitting myself. Put it that way.
I'm glad to hear it. You and I have been friends since Brisbane days. It's like approximately 2017.
2017, yeah. I think I sent you a really unprompted and just needy email being like, I don't know any writers, and I'm running a motel in Bundaberg, and I need to know some writers. Please be friends with me.
I have no recollection of that email.
It was something along those lines, yeah.
All right, okay.
And you took pity on me, and yeah, I think I was down in from Bundaberg one weekend, and I came to a writing group that you were doing, and this is pre Bri's first book, Eggshell Skull, and yeah, it was. I had traditionally hadn't really felt very comfortable. I didn't really know if to call myself a writer, and I didn't really know many writers, and so yeah, it's pretty cool, and then yeah, it made me feel like I was part of a community or a literary community, even something really small, which wouldn't have really registered much with yourself at the time.
You clearly have this image of me that I certainly did not have myself. But anyway, I feel like you and I signed for our books at really the same time. What has been happening between when, I guess, tell us about the journey of this, the first iteration being I Grief, and it turning into the book it is now.
Yeah, so I started writing it at the start of 2016. So I'd moved up to Bundaberg to run my dad's motel in the middle of 2015. And then I had been studying creative writing at uni, and I'd been writing fiction, and yeah, I got up to Bundy, and I was just bored shitless because I didn't really have much to do. I didn't really know many people. My brother lives up there, but he's got 3 kids, and so I was just at the motel a lot of the time, kicking out like drug dealers from motel rooms, and yeah, like just had, I don't know, I was just awake a lot at late at night and in the morning, and just had time to think about stuff, and yeah, I don't know whether it was that triggered me to sort of go back there. It occurred to me that it was something that would be like I would write about at some point. Like it wasn't that it was going to be a book or anything. It was sort of just an impulse that I had, and then yeah, once I started writing it, I just submitted it for the Scribe Young Writers Prize and got shortlisted and went down to Melbourne. And that was also like really cool. And the publisher at Black Ink at the time, Aviva Tarfield, just sent me an email out of the blue, being like, "Hey, I saw that you're running a motel in Bundaberg. That's pretty weird. Do you want to like send me the manuscript that you just got shortlisted for?" And I was like, "Yeah, sweet." And then like a couple of weeks later, I'd signed the deal, which like sounds very like blunt or abrupt, but I didn't have anything to compare that to in terms of like the publishing industry or anything. I was just like, "Oh, cool. This is like, yeah, this is what how it works." Which in hindsight, yeah, it doesn't usually work. Things don't usually happen that quickly. But so I essentially, yes, on the deal based on the first chapter, or a version of the first chapter, and then once I signed it, I found a manager to come and run the motel in Bundaberg, and then I moved to the Gold Coast to live with my sister, and I was going to write this book in 6 months. And I was like, yeah, this is going to be really awesome.
6 months.
Yeah, that was the agreement that I had. Yeah. And then I moved to the coast, and I don't know whether it was the bright lights or like the beaches or all of the holdups that were happening at KFCs in like the various suburbs there. But I just didn't do any, I didn't write anything for like 3 months. I had like complete writer's block.
Sorry, just blocking the Zoom. Great, thank you. I want to take us to the beginning of the book, which is a difficult place for the conversation to start because it's the crash. It's 2009. You're in a car with 6 of your friends, and there is a terrible crash. Just talk us through the first sort of the 24 hours that happened after that.
Yeah, it occurs to me so clearly now, both the event itself in some ways, although that's a bit patchy, like some of that is either blurry or just doesn't exist for me. But yeah, that period afterwards, I just have like I'm not like, shouldn't laugh, but I just have vivid memories of like the most mundane things, like just driving around Toowoomba like the next day, like between places, and just this feeling of like how like normal everything was around me. I knew that I'd obviously been in this tragic event, and all of these extraneous information was coming back to me about what was happening with my friends. But then at the same time, yeah, I was like, had to stop at the servo and fill up petrol and just stuff like that, yeah, shouldn't be memorable. But it was just, I was just stuck in this separate stream from like everyone else who was around me, because none of them had been in the accident, and everyone else who had been in the accident was in hospital or had passed away already. So yeah.
Something that was particularly brutal to read and slowly understand was just how much wild conjecture started. Did that started almost immediately after the accident?
Yeah, I was waking up that morning to messages, which was like in different camps, but like one of the messages was like, "What the hell happened?" Some of the messages was like, "I'm really sorry this has happened," and then there was like a bunch of messages which were like, "Rest in peace, Lech," like because well, yeah, like the one of the stories that was going around was that I'd been driving and that I was already dead, and so that was actually quite tame compared to just totally bizarre random embellishments that were traveling around, and which is quite a common response like from human beings in during these events is like Chinese whispers and yeah, like you wouldn't think that the story needed any more drama really, like but yeah, there was definitely the barbecue that I was at beforehand, which was for the most part 6 teenagers like sipping on mid-strength stubbies and eating sausages, and then a few more people came and they went home and nobody was drunk, and then suddenly like hundreds of people had been to this wild party in Highfields, um, and all a bunch of people had nearly gotten into the car, and then so that was then sort of propagated by the small talk between like parents, where like someone's parents would be like, "Oh yeah, my son or my daughter was at that party, and yeah, they nearly got in the car," and that's again like on the tame spectrum of like some of the conjecture that was sort of going around.
It's a particular time that Facebook in particular of all of the platforms was where everybody was, but also as a strange sort of nexus, like an overlap between people using regular citizens using Facebook to communicate information to each other, both privately but also on pages, and journalists starting to use things that they were gleaning from people's Facebooks to then report on. And something that struck me was realizing that when the accident happened, it was the exact nexus in that time. Yep.
Yeah, it literally just it had just taken off like in terms of in Australia. I think I signed up for Facebook at the end of like 2008. This happened in May 2009, and yeah, nobody really had any idea about privacy or anything. So I was just on Facebook straight away. Like I was running like a PR campaign, which is it was totally understandable what I was trying to do, but it was also just unprecedented that like after an event like that I could just jump onto this site and then share my grief. Well, I didn't really feel the grief at that point, but I was trying to communicate grief, and then that could be recirculated and used, and not even necessarily in a bad way by the media. And the photos that we were in could be used in newspaper articles, and so pictures at parties, for example, like not exactly the worst thing that was happening in terms of everything else that was going on around that. But yeah, it was a weird time.
What did you feel like you were supposed to do?
I I really thought that I was doing the right thing by not showing any emotion. There was a level of guilt a few times where I was like, I need to be showing some emotion, and I couldn't quite do it. But that was overridden by like a feeling of like pride that I wasn't like I wasn't crying. I was sort of comforting people. Like I was, that was my job, and that felt like, and maybe that was coming from a place of survivor's guilt. Um, Maybe that was just coming from a place of being a bloke um, and wanting to live up to an expectation that I had about myself in terms of my toughness, which I'd never been able to prove in a bunch of ways that I'd wanted to prove athletically or physically, and it just coalesced into this numbness, which was both, as I said, a product of like the trauma of the accident itself, but also a product of my social existence.
There's a line in there about being torn between survivor's guilt and imposter syndrome. What, talk to me about the space between those two things.
Well, five of the guys in the accident went to Downlands. One of those guys Nick had previously been at St. Mary's. So I'd known Nick and Tim, who was my best mate. I'd known them since I was a young kid. The other guys I'd only met maybe like some of them 9 months before, some of them like 3 months before. We'd kindled a really quick friendship, like Henry and Will. I'd spent a lot of time with them over at Nick's place. The driver, Dom, similarly, I'd spent a lot of time with him. I'd gone up to the coast and stayed with his family. And Hamish, I'd met him at a rugby game. And then I'd also like kindled a really, really sort of quick connection with him. But I hadn't known them all that long. I didn't know them inside out. I didn't know their families. I just didn't have that weight of history with them and that I did with Nick and Tim. And so when I was going to wakes and funerals, I was surrounded by people who were really messed up by it, and it felt like I didn't really deserve to be as messed up by it as them. So that was part of that fed into my feeling of I'll be the, like, I'm not the most in the hierarchy of grief. I'm not at the top here, so I'm going to be the guy that's patting everyone on the back and giving handshakes and they just sort of, that's the sort of pattern that I fell into.
It was very hard to read about the eulogy that you had to deliver. How do you... It reads in the book like you judge yourself quite harshly for how you delivered that, or what you felt like you were supposed to be doing at that time. You also wrote, young men exhaled through quivering noses, mouths closed, afraid of the sounds that might emerge if they opened them. What I want to know is, would you agree with the sense that sort of young men are discouraged from feeling feelings and finding words, but then also when this terrible thing happened, there was just suddenly a huge spotlight on you and people expected you to be able to pluck feelings and words out of thin air?
It's a tough one, because I was I don't judge myself harshly, because I was a 17-year-old boy who'd been through this terrible incident, and I was interested in the impulses that were feeding into the vocabulary that I developed at this time. And so when Henry's mum Melissa asked me to do the eulogy, I guess it was probably partly because I might be the person who could articulate the memory of her son that she wanted to preserve, because I was a good public speaker, because I was academic. I think that was partly the reason. And I guess my impulse was that I'd been through this terrible thing. 3 of my mates had died. I was delivering a eulogy for a guy who I like really, really loved, and I saw us like being mates for a long time, and yeah, but I couldn't articulate that. I couldn't articulate that in a way that, and it wasn't, it wasn't horrific what I said. I just told, like, and there were a few moments of emotion, but they weren't like, it was sort of crowded out by the piss takes and the stories, and I just wanted to, I didn't want people to I thought that people would think that it was dark and weird if I showed too much emotion, and that was just partly who I was. Like I was a very sensitive guy who also had grown up in a highly irreverent environment, and I was a bit of a class clown, and I like had a sense of humor, but obviously that wasn't necessary. And as I said, I don't think it's the biggest crime in the world. I just remember like Melissa saying to me, because the newspaper reported on the funeral and everything focused on my eulogy, and that was like the quote, which was like basically at the top of the article was like I can't remember exactly what it was, but it was something about how he gets all the girls, all the boys want to be like him, and he's never paid for a feed in his life, and like which wasn't necessarily untrue, but it was like she was like, is that it? Like, is that like, and then sorry, like the other interesting thing within that was that I'd airbrushed, and this is only something that I'm analyzing and saying it's from the perspective of a 29-year-old man. Like I'm not judging my 17-year-old self by this, but I'd completely airbrushed his female friendships from, and I'm not trying to be like, I'm not trying to be woke by saying that, but one of Henry's great qualities was that he actually had like heaps of female friends. Like if anything, he had more female friends than he had male friends. Like he didn't fear the friend zone with girls. He was very sensitive, very supportive, which was the opposite. Like I felt quite uncomfortable at that stage in terms of like having female friends. And I'm not saying that's the only thing about him, or that some of the funny things didn't need to be said, but I'd had conversations after that as well with girls who'd been known Henry, and they sort of felt like I'd just reduced him into being like a ladies' man who, just chased girls and chased skirt, and I just simplified him a little bit too much.
I want to move on from that immediate aftermath now. You did an incredible job of capturing schoolies in some funny ways, but also in I'd never read, and maybe it's because you and I are like almost at exactly the same like year, sort of like landmarks of our young lives, but I'd never read someone capture the simultaneous sort of revelry, but also how incredibly fucked up schoolies is, in quite a sort of dark, or at least anarchic way. Tell us about your experience of schoolies.
It was bizarre. Like I'd been dreaming about going to schoolies week since I was like 8 years old. Like and I had a heap of older siblings. So I had my brother John had come back from schoolies week with like yellow hair and like a nipple piercing, and I was like, oh, I want in on this. Like this. I remember he came home and he was still vomiting like when he got home, and I was just like, oh, this is going to be epic. And yeah, I like joke about it, but that was like, this was like the high point of like of my all of the coming of age rituals, and all of the rituals that weren't even related to age, but in terms of growing up in a pub and being surrounded by heavy drinking and risk taking and stuff. Like I was just like, yeah, this is going to be the best week of my life. And I'm not saying that it wouldn't have been weird or complicated if the car crash hadn't have happened, but then the car crash happens. And so I go to schoolies week in the like last week of November. The accident happened in the first week of May. My best mate, who I was supposed to be going to schoolies week with, Tim, was still in hospital. He'd only recently emerged from a coma. And so they're like, that's you can't really get any darker than that. Like that's like just one of the most awful things that could happen to a person. And then I was like graduating and then taken off to schoolies for a week, and like it was, wasn't even that far from like, and I was at schoolies with Nick, who'd been in a coma and had at the Gold Coast hospital. He'd been airlifted to the Gold Coast hospital, like miraculously recovered, gone back to school, and then he came down on the second night. And so we're there, and then there was the St. Mary's boys in 2 units. This is at the Islander, which is like known as like being the worst venue and like the most anarchic venue at Schoolies Week. And like we had 2 units, and then there's a group of girls from Toowoomba who had a unit halfway along, and then 2 groups of guys from Downlands who had units at the other end. So it was like just Toowoomba had occupied this floor at Schoolies Week. And yeah, I just wasn't like, it's just amazing to me. I was talking to Dom about this, like I was talking to Nick about this. I was like, it's like a week ago. I was like, how the hell did we go to Schoolies Week? Like, it's just like blows my mind still. But I guess the people around me and my parents and stuff, like they just like, they just wanted me to feel good, and they didn't know how to intervene in whatever the hell was going on. And then so I'm at Schoolies Week, and I'm like, don't have any rules, and I'd been like binge drinking that entire year and doing some pretty outrageous shit anyway, but like it was just on steroids. And then I just remember the other really weird thing about Schoolies Week is that you get like totally obliterated at your unit, and then you go down to the beach party, which is awful. Like it's just the most horrific fucking thing. Like maybe for some people get enjoyment out of that. I hate dancing. I hate like loud music. It's
painted as the perfect panorama of what I also remember, which is dancing. There were like the 2 stages at either end, dancing, and then looking out to the ocean to try and get a quiet moment, and realizing that there are just like 3 dozen dudes knee deep in the ocean pissing. Is that what that's?
yeah, it's just like a massive game of bull rush. There's all these people just going like from end to end. And then I just remember, because you can't drink there obviously, and so I'm starting to sober up. They feed you the water from the front of the stages, and it's sort of like this giant ploy to like sober up the people, which is good from a certain perspective. But that you're fed with all this dopamine and adrenaline, and then I just remember starting to sober up, and I saw this guy that just looked exactly like Henry, and which was like just the worst. It's just like being on this roller coaster, and then just having totally numbed any of those emotions, and then being totally like inserted back into them. And like I just remember this dude being like, "What the fuck are you looking at, mate?" Like this, because it just like, and I was just like, "Oh, nothing," and just like wandered away and was just on my own. And yeah, then just being totally overwhelmed by the schism between the bliss that I was supposed to be feeling, and then the reality of what I'd been through since May, and all of these guys who I was supposed to be at Schoolies Week with. I'd been at the Gold Coast with Henry and with Tim in February, and we'd been walking around with Dom and Nick, and we'd been talking about Schoolies Week, and then yeah, just going back to the apartment, walking home, and just like being a little bit more aware of everything. Like the walk there had just been so exhilarating, just like so awesome. And then on the way back, I was just like, holy fuck, like there's just people getting like in massive punch-ups, people filming the people in massive punch-ups, people filming people like getting their stomachs pumped, and then just like news crews like doing like circuits of like of Cavill Avenue, filming all of this. And it just felt like all of the awfulness of the spectacle of the accident just on like steroids. And yeah, I went back to the Islander, bunch of like red frogs down the stairs, and I'm just like, I got no time for you guys. Like you're like, it's that, like, are you like, how are you doing, mate? And I was just like, you guys are like, and then I just went upstairs, and I just and I got back to the apartment. There's like mugs of piss lining the hallways, and a handprint of shit on like the window in the bathroom, and like a flat screen TV wrapped in a bed sheet on the balcony. And I was just like, holy, like, and then I just felt so many layers of like shame and fraudulence, and in like from what I'd lost, and like it just, I just remember being on the balcony, and I don't want to like, I don't want to over-egg it, or like, or I also don't want to like trigger anyone, but like, yeah, I just remember feeling like life is meaningless. Like it's, and I'm standing on this balcony, like just watching people like telling each other to fuck off, like down the street, and like, I'm like, is this like my like escape route from everything that I've been through, is like this? Like it was just like and I just at that point I didn't see how I could ever deal with what I'd been through in any way that was actually going to like acknowledge it, because I was just like, it's just too much. Like it's far too much. And then, yeah, I stayed there for the rest of the week, and I never told anyone that I'd felt like suicidal ideation. Like I wasn't, I didn't spend the week feeling that way. Like this is an impulse that I had, but and then it's funny because I like, obviously the book's only just come out, but I remember doing a reading about the Schoolies week, and having conversations with people, and it's amazing how many people had similar experiences at Schoolies week of just complete existential despair. Like, and I'm laughing about it, but it's just like, and just nobody's actually saying that to each other. Like everyone's just like been telling themselves that all of their problems are going to be fixed because they went to Schoolies week, and they get there and they're like, holy shit, like this hasn't fixed anything. And I'm like, yeah. And so, yeah, I never told anyone that I'd like felt that. Definitely didn't tell anyone while I was still at Schoolies week, and didn't tell anyone when I got home and moved to Brisbane for university. And I was just like, I don't want to feel like that ever again. And like, I'll be fine. Like I'll just, do some hard work and go to uni, and started going to the gym and tried to reinvent myself as like a ripped GPS boy, even though I never went to like a GPS school, or like bought a heap of Ralph Lauren shirts. And I was like, I'm in business now. Like I'm a new man, and I'm the man of this this campus. I think Wyatt Roy had been there not long before me, and maybe I thought that I'd be the Labor Party version of him.
I was about to ask you attempted reinvention in Brisbane. But something else that you wrote is that trauma has two rival desires, death and perfection. I was just astonished with recognition when I read that line, that I'd never thought about it like that before, but it rung incredibly true for me. And also it made me think about the entire time I've known you, you've like run marathons. Talk to us about what was happening with your body and your sleep, and how that fit in with this idea of reinvention when you started uni.
Oh, it's bizarre looking back on it, because I'd been like a really overweight kid in a family with a bunch of siblings who had like the body of gods. Like that, even my sisters were like ripped as and had like 8-packs and like biceps and stuff. And I was just this really uncoordinated, overweight youngest child. And so I'd always like absolutely loathed my body, which never get like blokes certainly never talk about that, but I don't really give a shit compared to everything else that I've written about. So I remember being like 11 and actually just doing like this self-imposed like boot camp. Like I stopped eating pizza and like started eating like succotash for lunch and like yeah. And I remember we did a trip to McDonald's in like grade 6, and I like got like, I think I bought like an apple or something, and even the teacher was like, what's going on here with this dude who's like a footy player and like grew up in a pub and he's eating an apple at McDonald's? Like, what the fuck? And but then so that and then I'd stop playing sport as a teenager. I'd after the accident happened, I just packed on a heap of kilos. Like, not that would have been that noticeable because I was already a bit overweight, but I'd just like I'd just been binge eating, binge drinking, binge smoking that whole year after the accident. And then so there was already a baseline level of like self-consciousness about that. And then, you know, the culture was like like The Biggest Loser had been around, like and I loved The Biggest Loser. I was like, look at all these losers, like this is
Which one's the biggest?
yeah. And then so I saw that I like that was feeding into it. There's a like baseline level of like self-loathing, and then I'd suffered all this outbreak of emotions during graduation and then schoolies week, and I was in Brizzy. A lot of my friends and the people that I've become friends with after the accident all come from fairly like middle class or upper class families, university educated. The parents all looked like low BMI, and my parents were like quite overweight and Republicans and very unhealthy lifestyles. And so there was a bit of like class feeding into that. And then I was just like, yeah, trauma, it produces those moments of like existential distress and like emptiness, but then it also produces this sense of perfectionism, which I saw that as like an opportunity to, and I wasn't thinking it maybe consciously at the time, but I saw that as an opportunity to erase this sadness, this sadness that I felt by going to the gym and by creating this vision of success and health. And so there's a bunch of things feeding into that, but basically I just like got like super skinny, like to the extent that like nobody was like, yeah, people were just like, what the fuck? Like you've lost so much weight. You're so skinny. And then I was still drinking to the same extent as I had been in grade 12. Like I could drink a carton of beers and I'd still be standing. And that's like, sounds terrible to someone who hasn't drunk a carton of beers, but it wasn't like, I wasn't even like messed up or anything. And then I was still drinking like that after I'd lost, might have been like 85 kilos before I moved to Brizzy. And then I think I was like 65 kilos or something. And I'd just get like completely obliterated. Like I was just blackout drunk after a 6-pack or whatever. Like, and that's all my attempted reinvention is splintering apart because I was just falling into like a textbook case of like major depression. And the first anniversary of the accident happened, and I was just overwhelmed by the ridiculousness of like what I was attempting to like airbrush my grief and trauma from my life, and nothing had really changed since schoolies week. Really, like I hadn't addressed my trauma, I hadn't addressed my grief, I hadn't had really like a meaningful conversation about it to anyone. And yeah, then I just didn't. I just stopped sleeping. I'd already been a bad sleeper after the accident, and it wasn't like it's not like it wasn't PTSD. I wasn't like reliving suffering flashbacks or anything. I just wasn't sleeping because I was just so like miserable. And then I would be so sleep deprived, and then I'd be suffering sleep paralysis, and I'd be having all these dreams about my mates and not about the accident itself, but just like my mates. And yeah, it was all these things just coming together, and like I was just destined to have like it wasn't destined to have, it wasn't fate what ended up happening, which is I went home to Toowoomba and I got shit faced and got picked up for drink driving, and that wasn't fate that happened, but like either that was going to happen or, you know, something worse was going to happen.
When you were putting this book together, was there anything in particular that you grappled with leaving in or wanted to take out? Because it is incredibly honest.
Yeah, I grappled with a lot of stuff. I grappled with a lot of the stuff that probably won't seem very confronting to people. I grappled with putting in stuff, trivial stuff about like relationships that I was in, or nice stuff about like friendship. And because when I first started writing it, I felt like it could only be grief and it could only be trauma. And so yeah, I guess that answers your question, but it's not the stuff that you'd be thinking like that I thought about cutting out. Like that was the stuff that like I knew needed to be in there, because but it was the stuff that didn't quite. It was the stuff that wasn't about grief and wasn't about trauma and wasn't about mental health that I like grappled with putting in there.
For people who haven't read it yet, can you explain your, I suppose, unusual arrangement with the psychologist?
Oh.
I can't believe that.
Yeah, I won't use his name because I used a pseudonym in the book, but Christopher, if you're watching, mate, thanks a lot. You done me a massive these last 10 years or whatever. Like I still Skype him occasionally and just have a chin wag, and he does it for free. So thanks, mate. But yeah, my sister was a psychologist, and so he was her like honors supervisor, and he was just a really great professor of psychology. And so she just went to him and was like, "What the hell do I do about this?" Like, and he said, "Oh, I'll do the therapy, but if I can film it and like live stream it to my graduate students." Which I was like, "Oh, that's great!" Like, I didn't want to pay a cent for it. Like, I had no money, and so I was like, "Oh, I got no qualms doing that. Like, that's sweet by me." Which might sound completely horrifying to people, but like, yeah, I wasn't particularly worried about it. Like, I was just like, yeah, I don't want to pay a cent for psychology. Like, that'd been probably one of my biggest reasons for not doing it sooner. And then I also got like access to this incredible psychologist who was sort of at the cutting edge of what he was doing, and yeah, it was the most. I mean, outside of my relationships to my like friends and families, like it's one of the most important people that I've ever met. And I don't mean that in like a overwrought sort of way, like that we sat in there just like me talking about my grief or trauma all the time, because a lot of it wasn't actually that at all. Like a lot of it was the trivial shit, like about me being like a fat kid who couldn't make the first at St. Mary's. Like a lot of it was that, and that allowed me, I worked back through all of that extraneous, seemingly to me at that point, like completely beside the point information. I worked back through that, created like a coherent identity. I worked through my contradictions about why I acted and felt in certain ways. And then we got to the stuff. And that was just like the most magnificent, like genius way to approach it all. And that allowed me to actually work out who I was before I then actually like did the really hard work of being like, who are these people that you've lost and what do you feel about having lost them? And that was just completely priceless. Like, and something which is so privileged, because I make jokes about money. Like my mum and dad weren't like super rich, but they were middle class. Like by the time I was a teenager, like they'd been working class when I was growing, like in my early childhood. But by then, like my dad owned a pub, he owned like investment properties and stuff. Like he would have they would have paid for it. Like, it's that all the people like walking around in Australia who don't have any access to dealing with traumas, both mundane and enormous, who don't have access to the sort of attention that I got just because my sister happened to be like a psychology student at like a good uni and was like a getting great grades and sort of could open a door in that way, which, as I said to you, like is more important than any for my mental health, I think, than anything else that I did in that period.
Lek and I have about 10 minutes left of talking between the two of us before we go to audience questions. So for anyone here, bring your questions to the fore of your mind. For anyone watching at home on Zoom, don't forget that you can type your questions into the Q&A box at any time, and I will go through them and take questions both from online and from the audience in person. I really want to hear you talk about larrikins. And
I love talking about larrikins.
Yeah, good. Something for anyone who hasn't read the book and who, for some baffling reason, is on the fence about whether they intend to. Something I really want to make clear is that this book it's an incredible capturing of our country, and our country both about 10 years ago and also right now, about class in particular, about the sort of this seemingly huge divide between country and city Australia as well. Tell me about what a larrikin is, and in doing so, tell me why you wrote that your dreams felt like treason in terms of the sort of artistic aspirations you had compared to what you felt like you should have done.
Yeah. So I had two sides of my personality. One was my mother, who was also like a high school dropout like my dad, and both from very poor backgrounds. But my mum was a massive reader, and so she fed these literary aspirations that I had into me. I grew up surrounded by books and was always going to the library. And my dad would have never read a novel. He was a publican. He was a larrikin. Like, he was a larrikin, and he was a very imperfect person by, I think, his own admission. But he was a larrikin, and I think the ways that you might associate it with it being a good thing. He was very disrespectful of the establishment. He channeled this very intuitive egalitarianism towards practical outcomes. It wasn't just about taking the piss. Like, he was a foster carer, and he was the branch president of the Labor Party in a part of the world where the Labor Party gets like absolutely hammered. And he put his money where his mouth was. And Mum was the same. Like, she was politically engaged. And I guess that's where I see a larrikin as being a potentially good thing. Like, my dad's, he was anti-war. He was very, he hated the monarchy. He hated the Liberal Party. He hated pretensions, and he hated authority when it was coming from a place of too much privilege. But if you met my dad, and my dad passed away in 2011, but if people in Sydney and Melbourne, I think, met my dad, they would think that he was like Scott Morrison's #1 fan, because of the way that he talked, and because of the way that he looks, and because of some of his interests. And not to bring it like, not to make him talk about my book about Scott Morrison, because that's like, seems so beside the point. But that's I see the invention of a political persona like Scott Morrison's as taking the reality of those personality traits and using them without actually like the underpinning ideologies that drive them.
And took the cap and nothing else.
Yeah, all cap and like all tip and no iceberg. And I don't want to get as I said, I don't want to turn this into like a rant, which I'm doing. But I don't even mean that in an ideological sense. I just mean that like Scott Morrison as a dude isn't a rugby league fan, isn't a bloke who goes down to the pub and has a punt and has a beer, but he's in the lead up to becoming leader, he reinvented himself as these things, and he took the personality traits of someone like my dad and the people who I grew up around in pubs, and he used it to win an election. Now, what does that mean in terms of me and my battle between these? Like, I always saw it as like a battle between like the larrikin and battle between the artists, because I was like, whenever I was in the artist mindset, I was like, oh, that larrikin guy's a jerk. Like, he's just always taking the piss out of everything, and like he's just obsessed with having mates. And then when I was a larrikin, I was like, oh, that artist guy, he's just a sack of shit. Like, he's so self-absorbed, and so I was just like constantly vacillating between these personalities. And one of the things that I did with my psychologist was he really clarified it for me. He was like, oh no, like both of those sides of yourself are like, they're actually just innate parts of you, like you from your upbringing and stuff. So when I wrote about seeing my literary aspirations or my artistic aspirations as being treason, it was double-edged, because partly it was just I didn't want to be the sensitive artist in the environment that I was in, because that wasn't the done thing. But it was also more complicated than that, because I was having all of these conversations with my dad. I was so nihilistic about politics at that point, and I wanted to opt out of political engagement because I just wanted to be an artist who, whether I was going to write poems or be a singer in a band or write novels or whatever like that, I was like, I'm out of politics. Like, politics sucks. It doesn't do anything. It doesn't mean anything. And my dad, in sometimes very, very politically incorrect language, was like just telling me to like pull my head out of my ass, and that if I was to just completely opt out of being engaged in politics, and if I was to like that was the tree, like that's the other treason. It's not just between the personality traits. It's also about like that I needed to. That's fine if you're going to write your poems and write your books and stuff, but that doesn't mean that you just like shut out the world, or like not engage with the political process, or not encourage other people to engage with the political process. So yeah, that was for him. I don't think he called it treason. I think he just thought that I was too high on my own supply.
The final question I have for you before we go to audience questions, especially in the sort of first kind of half of the book, it's not shocking, but it is atrocious to realize just how terrible the media have been, either to you directly or just how terrible you have seen the media be. I'm interested that now you write, and you don't do sort of daily journalism, but you still write for sort of news outlets. And I wanted to, I guess, just hear you talk about how you feel about the media now that you're a part of it, and whether your understanding of journalism has developed in a particular way, whether you judge the actions of the media in the past more harshly or with more understanding, like if you have a sort of antagonistic relationship with the punters versus the writers. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I always understood the me, like I'd written news articles for the local paper in Toowoomba as a 13-year-old, like about sport and stuff. And so I was always been interested in newspapers, and I'd always been interested in writing and stuff. And I totally got what was happening when the accident happened. And I wasn't, even though some things were like just beyond the pale in terms of details that just didn't happen and were reported as fact. It was never rage. It was just like, it was a really imprecise emotion, because I guess it just made me think about the people reading it as well. Like I wasn't anti-journalist, or like, I was like, what's driving having people to consume the sort of media that we consume, and because I do the same thing, like I do the same thing when it's other people's tragedies, and so I'm not like better than, I don't see myself as being like better than the people that I'm talking about who consume media about tragedies. But yeah, like now that I'm a journalist, which I still feel just, not that my skin doesn't crawl because I hate journalists, but like I just don't. I didn't do like a journalism degree, so it just feels weird to call myself that. But I guess that's what I'm doing in some ways, um, and yeah, I guess maybe subconsciously that's fed into the way that I write, and the kind of, and I've been really lucky to work for a publication who's just invests so much time in allowing me to like write in a long form, and I'm writing like in a way that feels almost like novelistic rather than, and that sounds like I've got my head up my ass again, but yeah, I feel like that's the antidote to those small trivializations of grief or trauma. And I'm not always going to get it right, and I've had moments where I've felt really bad about certain things, but I guess I just I want to like make things as complex as possible, which feels like the opposite of, and like really, even in the people that I don't necessarily like, search for the humanity and like enlarge that, and I feel like that's my nature as a human being, and I hope that's my nature as like as an essayist or as a journalist. Like it's all about it's all about enlarging the humanity of people rather than like removing their humanity or turning them into statistics or clickbait.
Does anyone here in person have any questions? I'm sure you do. There's always an awkward gap at the beginning where people don't put their hands up. And also for people online, if you have any questions, please feel free to type them in. Yes. The question, sorry, I have to repeat the question so the people watching Zoom can hear them. The question was, are you writing another book?
Yeah, I started writing a book about my family and my long story short, yeah, about my foster siblings and their biological parents, and I started that about the same time that I started writing Car Crash. I haven't like made a huge dent in it. I published an essay a few years ago, which will sort of form like the nucleus of that. But I'll want to like take that to the nth degree and write about it in a way that it won't be like a memoir, because it's not really going to be, from my perspective, it's going to sort of be, I'm really going to live inside the minds of these other characters, and I'm going to write it like a novel, and that's going to be really liberating because I don't even show up until like I'm the last person to arrive at the party. So like I'm not there from the start of the story. So that's like feels really liberating.
One of your friends, Nick, asked you if writing about it helps, and you said not exactly. What does that mean?
Who said that?
One of your friends, Nick? No? Someone asked you if like writing the book.
Oh, yeah. Nick. I thought that was like a question that I was like, who's Nick? Like,
no, sorry. Yeah, I realized how confusingly I just that.
Yeah, no, it doesn't. Like it does. It helps now that I can actually, like, I'm here and I'm like talking to people about it, and then they can talk to me about it. And I don't just mean like tonight, but just in general. And that helps, like, definitely. But like writing a book about this, like, doesn't help like in the short term. It's like submerging yourself in all of these feelings of guilt and then turning it into like work. And that's like not, yeah, it's not cathartic at all. Like it's just, yeah, the level of editing and the level of perfectionism is the complete antithesis of of like reaching some level of like catharsis. But I've had all that like conversations with Nick or conversations with Dom that I never would have had if I didn't write the book. And that's like where I find some, it's not closure, but it's it feels like we're on each other's level for the first time.
Any more questions? Yes. Sorry, just repeat. I'm just have to repeat for the Zoom. How is your use of social media now, and your tweeting habits, attitude towards it, etc.?
I've just accepted that I've got like a full blown addiction to social media. Like I think most people of my generation do. So I'm not like, yeah, I think that I was going to say, I think that I'm like slightly more, I'm slightly more sophisticated about my levels of like privacy and stuff, but I also just like wrote a memoir. So that's like not really like completely true. But I don't know. I don't judge people for like for social media use and stuff. Like I look at it and I see it as like a desire for like connection, and I see like lots of positive parts of it. So it's not all like, I don't see it as all being completely terrible or anything.
Do you consider yourself a private person?
I don't know. Do I seem like a private person?
No, but that's why I asked, do you consider yourself a private person? Because something that shocked me is that, like, when I meet people, and because I've written a book that's, it's like, our experiences have been very similar in terms of being young people who write books that are about traumatic things that take place at a very particular sort of time in our lives. And like when people meet you, they're going to feel like they know you. And that happens to me, but I have entire areas of my life that I know I would never write about, and I still consider myself quite a private person. And there's just like a kind of, I guess, a cognitive dissonance there.
Well, yeah, I'm not like, I don't. Maybe that's why I did like therapy for like a room full of graduate students. I don't know. Like it's just, yeah, I just don't really like. I'm at a point in my life where both of my parents aren't here anymore, which is terrible. But I don't have expectations in terms of like that I'm going to get a phone call from either of them about like about something that I write in the book, and so it just completely changes the game, and it doesn't feel like I need to be restrictive about certain things. It's like, just get it all out there, and that's going to help people more if I just remove those layers. And that sounds like I'm making myself into a martyr or something. I'm not like saving people. This is in some ways like what I'm doing is entertainment, but I hope that it's also like providing some sort of self for the pains that people have in their lives and making them feel more capable of like happiness and joy, and by having addressed those things.
We're really pushing it for time, but I would love to be able to take one or two more. Does anyone in the room have any other questions for Lech? Somebody would just, let's finish on this actually, just like to hear about what it was like with Dom going through the trial, and the outcome of that.
It was totally bizarre. Like we spent a lot of time together. My mate Dom, who was a driver, he got charged with 3 counts of dangerous driving causing death and 2 counts of dangerous driving causing grievous bodily harm, and that ended up happening in going to trial in August 2011, and we spent all of the after the accident together when we were still at school, and then we spent a lot of the next year together, like hanging out and stuff, and we just never talked about it. Like we had a conversation right during the trial, and it was, I just remember him being like just wanting it to be over, whether he thought he was going to jail, and that's what his lawyers had told him to expect, and he was like, yeah, I'm going to get like 7 or 8 years, but so what? Like, that's nothing compared to what other people have lost, and the people affected by that. And so I did have expectations that trial would happen, and either way I was going to feel like some sense of closure. I was like, oh, this will, because everyone kept on saying, oh, like you know, that's like it'll finally be over and you can finally move on. And then the trial happened, and there was just this, I was flooded with just this sense of like the greatest anticlimax in the world, because I was like, all of these things, all of these feelings and all of these emotions that I've been talking about tonight are completely have like no real connection to the trial or whether Dom was guilty or not guilty. And it turned out that he was judged not guilty and completely um, acquitted of what he'd been charged of. And the testimony from forensic investigators said that he was below the speed limit and that he was totally sober when the accident happened, and the jury acquitted him of all crimes. Um, and we've talked about that after it, like while I was writing the book. We didn't really talk about it in depth immediately, but yeah, he just told me that he felt the same. It wasn't exactly the same because he was so much closer to it, but that he also felt like it wasn't, it was just like relief to like not be going to jail, obviously, but like he was still stuck with all of the reality of what had happened, like which had sort of just been completely suspended for the 2 years before that.
Thank you very much. This is sort of the beginning of the big sort of tour for you. I think you've written a truly incredible book. And I'm really grateful to call you a friend. Can everyone please thank Lech Blaine?
Thanks, Bri.